next session is our ongoing Leaders series in a fireside chat moderated by Bill Winters, Group Chief Executive Officer of Standard Chartered. This session will feature Satya Nadella, Chief Executive Officer of Microsoft. In this conversation, Bill and Satya will discuss the importance of digital resilience and transformation. Now, this is important not only to recover from the current pandemic crisis, but to prepare for the next possible tail event. We'll also be able to hear Bill and Satya discuss the future of work and what the new normal will possibly look like. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, so let's get to it and hand the time over to Bill and Satya.
Well, here we are at the Singapore FinTech Festival. I'm Bill Winters, the CEO of Standard Chartered, with Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, well known to all of us. The FinTech Festival, I think, is a great opportunity to bring together the worlds of technology and finance. That's what FinTech is all about. And I'm delighted to be the finance half of a discussion today with clearly one of the world leaders in technology, Satya. We often get the question in banking, Satya, we'll talk about this, I think, is technology a partner for us? Is it a competitor for us? Are we two ships passing in the night? And my short answer is, in different circumstances, all three. But I know that as it relates to Standard Chartered and Microsoft, it's a true partnership. And this is going back quite a while, of course. But very importantly for us was the cloud-based partnership that we set up in August of this year, where we have co-opted Microsoft, and you've agreed to come along with us and help us to become cloud first in everything that we do, including getting all of our core applications into the cloud by 2025, including core banking systems, trading systems, and the like. So this is a true partnership, and one that couldn't have come at a better time. And of course, we started the discussions before the COVID pandemic set in, but we announced it in the middle of all this. And I'd be very curious to dive into some of your views on both the evolutions in technology broadly, but also specifically as it relates to financial services, and then more specifically, the world after. I think it's not too soon to be thinking about the world after. But maybe if I could just kick off, Satya, with a couple of questions. You said that every company is a digital company, and be very interested in your take on what that means for a financial services company, and how you and Microsoft are positioning that.
No, first of all, Bill, it's so fantastic to be with you and participate at the FinTech conference. And your comment, which you just made, really strikes, I think, home for me in terms of what's happening, right? If you think about the real change that is happening outside of any organization is the change in consumer behavior and expectations. And the value chains are being reconfigured. If I look at even our own partnership, in fact, what you are trying to do is reinvent every layer. How people inside the organization are working has gone through a radical change in terms of adoption of the latest collaboration technologies to facilitate even the remote work. But then if you come to, say, how you're interfacing with your customers, some of the technology, AI and data work that you're doing in the cloud, to really personalize the experience journeys for your customers. That's sort of pretty revolutionary, and it's going to bring about a lot of change. And the new inventions, like I was looking and reading about all the things you're doing around real-time payments and using even trends like IoT in inventing essentially new businesses and new products. That's, I think, the foundation of what's going to happen, right? When we today talk about FinTech and core banking, I think all of these blend coming out of this pandemic, if anything. In some sense, banking has always been, and financial services have always been leading technology adopters. And I think coming out of this crisis, I think there's going to be more of an acceleration. There's going to be a fair amount of disruption, but there is also going to be blending of, even on the regulatory side, I think, Bill, what I'm seeing is these arbitrage opportunities will go away, and all of what needs to happen from a financial services perspective will happen, and will happen with speed, with technology.
No, that's excellent. And I think you've hit on a number of the key things on the minds of, I think, all of us that are involved in financial services. One is we are heavily regulated, and something that you may have to look forward to as well as the tech industry evolves. And I know something you're very, very focused on. But at the same time, we're all very keen to focus on some of the frontiers in technology and how we can get that little bit of an edge, or hopefully in some cases a lot of an edge, by delivering customers a fundamentally different proposition through the use of creative use of technology. And I'd be very curious to get your views on what some of those leading edge frontier technologies are that might be relevant for financial services and perhaps that aren't on our radar screen to the extent that they should be right now. And then if you could just reflect on some of the challenges that might throw up for regulators or for us vis-a-vis our regulators, that would be really interesting to explore.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think a lot about is what is the core paradigm of technology and how is it changing, right? Because in some sense, financial services are going to ride the wave of this paradigm shift. So at the foundation level, Bill, I think a lot about what's happening with just computation and computing fabric. It's getting embedded in the world, right? We talk about the cloud. The reality is it's not just in the cloud, but the cloud resource now is embedded in a factory. It's embedded in a retail store. It's embedded at city scale. It's embedded in a branch. So in some sense, the real world is being transformed because computing is everywhere. And that, I think, is probably one of the most profound changes. The layer above that, once you have a lot of computational resource and the ubiquity of it, what happens is you have this next resource, which is called data. The reality is now you have the ability to take all that data and turn it into analytical power and predictive power using even techniques like AI, right? I mean, at the end of the day, any organization is only as good as being able to understand the past or predict the future. And you want to be able to do that together. And that, to me, is one of the big changes that's happening in that sort of what people would call business logic tier. And then above that, the experience is changing, right? Of course, the mobile experience is ubiquitous today, but I even look at this pandemic, it's changing how people expect, video has become first class. People will fully expect telebanking to be something that is ubiquitous and available all the time. VR and AR are going to become mainstream because that's the one way to transcend space and time. And so the experience is going to be profoundly different. It'll be multi-sense, multi-device. The layer below that is going to be driven by data and AI, and it's all going to be powered by this computational engine in some sense, or fabric that's embedded in the world. And I think financial services obviously doesn't live in isolation. In fact, all the financial services products are integrated into the real economy. When retail changes, financial services change. One of the most fascinating experiences that I've seen recently is when you go to check out any product, it's no longer about payment as the only financial service. You can get credit, you can get payments, you can get so many things at the point of checkout. That's the innovation coming out of financial services, but getting integrated as the other sectors of the economy are changing.
No, I think that those are all excellent points, and you're hitting on exactly the things that I think we as financiers are very focused on, which is on the one hand, how does the world of finance and the ordinary transaction lives and preferences of our customers meld into a whole, and how as banks can we use the technology that you and others, and in some cases we ourselves, have developed in order to address that convergence. But in order to make this happen, we know that there are some fundamental cultural shifts in our organizations that are critical. And you've led, I think, one of the great cultural evolutions, maybe you'd say revolution, in corporate history at Microsoft. I'm sure you'll say it's a work in progress, but it would be very interesting to understand what you saw at the genesis of the cultural transformation that you've undertaken, and again, anything you could share about how that might port across to other organizations like Standard Chartered, or I think most banks or finance companies who are listening to this would say we've got the same sort of undertaking that we must pursue.
No, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's still a work in progress. But there were two things that have grounded at least my approach to what is our ongoing need for transformation. One is that sense of purpose, because I think one of the things that sometimes when things get, in fact, more complicated and confusing, going back to the basic principles of why do you even exist, that sense of purpose that, in fact, led to your creation. That's what I had to do. One of the things that we as a company got very focused on is when Bill and Paul started Microsoft in 1975, they created created technology for other developers. In fact, the first product Microsoft created was the basic interpreter for the Altair. Of course, in 2020, there's a lot more to program than the Altair, but that basic idea that was behind Microsoft is in fact even more powerful today, because we create technology so that Standard Charter and everyone at this conference can create more technology of their own, right? And that's reigniting that passion for why we were even born and why do we exist has been one part of the change. The other side, Bill, to your point, is culture. Because even if you have the sense of purpose, if you succeed sometimes initially, what happens is, as I always say, from ancient Greece to modern Silicon Valley, there's only been one thing that has gotten in the way of continued success. That's hubris. In the late 90s, we were very successful, and we thought that that must be because we're all smart. Except the reality is, you have to stay humble, you have to stay hungry, you have to, most importantly, start learning each day. Without that posture, you can never do useful things. And so we adopted this cultural meme, which has been super helpful, from Carol Dweck's work on child psychology called growth mindset. And it pushes you. It pushes you from sort of starting as this know-it-all to be a learn-it-all. And that transformation, which every day, the day you say you now are a learn-it-all, means you're a know-it-all. And so therefore that paradox is what helps keep you really with the right approach to being a learning organization.
I must say, Satya, that the way you're describing the convergence of purpose and culture, I think is part of the reason that we've been able to partner so effectively with your organization. I mean, Standard Chartered is also fundamentally purpose-driven, and we recognize that if that isn't embedded in our culture, and there are many, many manifestations of that, not least the way that we're melding our sustainability objective externally and consistent with our purpose, together with the way we're driving a sustainability business internally. Of course, we can make money to help fund the good efforts that we're undertaking, and I think we're working extremely closely with the Microsoft team to do that. And I think that that can only work, I think, when organizations are fundamentally aligned. But we know that all of this is at the very core is driven by meeting and serving customer needs. And Microsoft, again, for decades, but really I would note accelerated under your leadership, has focused on getting the client at the heart of everything that you do. Banks in particular maybe lost that message a little bit along the way. In particular, during some of the more difficult times around the global financial crisis, when companies tended to turn in. They'd be very curious to get your thoughts on how you maintain clients at the heart of everything that you do, given that in many ways you are also a product-driven organization. And just how do you think about that melding?
I mean, that's a great question, because in some sense, one of the things that we have been trying to do, in fact, as an exercise, what does it mean to have a growth mindset or a learn-it-all culture? It fundamentally comes down to having that customer obsession. In fact, we narrowed it to sort of 3 everyday practices for everybody at Microsoft, whether it's diversity and inclusion, coming together as one company, and more as importantly, coming together with that customer obsession. The interesting thing is no customer of ours, including you, or partner of ours, including you, care about my internal divisions or our technology or our strategy. What do you care about is, hey, how can what you do be relevant in the context of what you're doing for your customers? So one of the things that we have been trying to really train ourselves, Bill, is a lot on what I'll call having that deep sense of empathy for your customers. You can even call it design thinking, right? I mean, people go and think of this as an engineering discipline called design thinking. But the reality is it starts with deep listening skills and to be able to meet unmet, unarticulated needs of your customers. You really need that culture to be in place. It assumes you have the technology capability or the expertise, but without that core embedding of that listening posture, listening behind the words, beyond the words, that's what's most important. And it's hard. Sometimes, by the way, the engineers have to look at log files and salespeople have to sort of actually be in meetings listening. And both of those are important. And sometimes you say, it's about the customer service people who are going to listen to customers. That's the worst way to think about being customer obsessed. So everybody inside the organization being part of that feedback cycle is perhaps the most important thing. And I must say, I'm coming out of, interestingly enough, in this pandemic, Bill, that process is accelerated just because of the remote everything constraint. In fact, organizations that have good listening systems have been able to come out of this, or at least are working through this crisis much better. And I think all of us are going to be very, very focused on embedding it both in the culture and in the process and the approach.
Yeah, you've hit on two of my favorite words to describe great leaders, and I know that you embody both of these. The first is curiosity, or that learn everything, and the second is empathy. I think empathy is just critical, internally and externally, and I may have picked that up from you along the way. I've heard you speak enough times to perhaps you've simply imbued that into my mind, but I have tried to make this part of the way we run things, and to hear you articulate this so clearly is just extremely powerful. Can we shift a little bit to the whole question of trust and trust in technology? Again, from a financial services perspective, the research indicates that we actually have a trust surplus, which isn't always a conventional wisdom, but people trust us with their money. Obviously, they also trust us with our data. And I know that this is something that that tech companies broadly, Microsoft in particular, is dealing with very directly. Maybe talk a little bit about the trust horizon and the ways that we can get to an end state that you think works for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's great to hear even that data point about financial services. You're absolutely right. I mean, trust is something that is not claimed, but it's earned. And as you said, the fact that my banking relationship or my financial services relationships and my data is something that is, very important. And the fact that you have that trust surplus, one of the things that I look at and say, what are the core principles that led to creation of that surplus? In our case, for example, we think about the following. We think about privacy. We think about cybersecurity. We think about AI ethics and internet safety. These are broadly the four areas where we are trying to make sure that we have core set of, I'll call it, design principles that are embedded in how we work and in the products and services we build. Security is probably the best known because it's the most mature of even the engineering disciplines. It's ongoing, but at the same time, we have good engineering process. Privacy increasingly is becoming a human right. And so again, there's also regulation. So you now need to embed privacy into both as an engineering process as well as practice. But then AI safety or AI ethics, that's the new field. It's the frontier, whether it's image recognition or data provenance or language models that need to be debiased. We are making sure we're investing in all of the technology capabilities so that we don't abdicate, right? We can't say AI did it. I mean, ultimately, some person in some company is responsible. And especially in financial services, I've studied a lot. I mean, you have regulations around credit. And so we have to sort of really make sure that we adhere to those principles. And lastly, internet safety. That's broadly. We know that we can break democracies if you don't have internet safety. You can have all kinds of issues with child safety if you don't have internet safety. And so these are big issues for our society. And so being principled, that's how you all in your industry have approached it. And that's, I think, what the tech industry at scale has to do as well.
Satya, I must say, I think all of us really applaud the message itself, but also the consistency of your message across topics. There's a very, very common theme, and there's an ethical underpinning to the way that you're approaching your business, which comes through very clearly, and I think it's got to be a big part of the reason that you've affected the transformation that you have. I know we're coming close to the end here, but I can't let the opportunity go by without asking you about your view of some of the longer-term trends, some of the things that will never go back to the way they were before, but also some of the things that we might not even be thinking about today, that you might want to plant in our minds for the evolutions down the road.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm actually studying quite a bit, Bill, right now is, in fact, all the data are on productivity, right? I mean, in some sense, we've never seen an at-scale, I'll call it, even though it's unfortunate, experiment like this, where we have all these constraints put on where we can be and with whom we can be, and, we can't travel and all of that. So this remote everything world, and we're able to sort of, at the same time, sustain a level of productivity, which is pretty stunning to me. But at the same time, I'm trying to say, okay, what is the driver? So, for example, when it comes to how people collaborate, I think it's fundamentally changing. In fact, one of the things that I'm amazed by is just not knowledge worker productivity. It's about the first line worker being able to reach out to the expert who's remote using something like a HoloLens from a factory floor or the medical emergency room or the surgery room. That's, I think it's just going to tremendously change every industry going forward. Similarly, how people work. I mean, we're on video meetings all day, but it's not just video meetings. Work happens before, during, and after. So collaboration environments are going to reshape, I think, how people come together and how they can be productive. Learning is another one. Like, after all, a corporation is only as good as its ability to turn the knowledge and create knowledge. And so having the learning content, your connections to other experts inside the organization all get embedded into the natural workflow. That's another very important area, and we're seeing some tremendous innovation there. And lastly, one thing, Bill, we are very, very concerned about and also working tremendously is on well-being, because it's one thing to talk about output and productivity, but you got to realize that the output has a necessary condition about the well-being of your people. And that's where, avoiding burnout. I mean, we even done some fascinating studies with EEG and recognized that 30 minutes into your first the video meeting, because of the cognitive load of video meetings, you're burnt out, right? I mean, you're fatigued. And so one of the things that we have done is innovation, even using some AI techniques in Teams with things like the together mode to just break you out of the squares you're in, so that you can have both togetherness, you can have the cognitive load come down. So that's just one little example. But really, well-being, learning, collaboration are going to be three profound ways that even how we approach our professional careers is going to fundamentally change.
Well, that is fascinating. And Satya, for me, this is the beginning of my day in Singapore. So there's no excuse for me being burned out. It's the end of your day in Seattle. But I can tell you there's no sign of a cognitive overload. So fantastic that you could join the Singapore FinTech Festival with such a great set of insights. Thanks so much for doing this. And I look forward to seeing you in person before too long.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bill, for having me.
Well, that was a very, very valuable discussion with, I believe, many tips that we can take away with us today.